I never considered myself the type to play tricks, but that afternoon, I was restless. My son had left his car unlocked in the driveway, the leather seats still warm from the sun. A little mischief stirred in me. I thought, why not hide in the back seat and jump out when he returned, just to hear him laugh like he did when he was little. It was a childish impulse, but sometimes a mother longs to feel close in any way she can. The air inside smelled faintly of his aftershave, sharp and citrusy. I crouched low, tucking my knees, pressing my palm against the cool glass of the door. My heart beat in a rhythm both silly and excited. The late afternoon light flickered through the branches outside, casting shifting shadows across the dashboard. For a moment, I was carried back decades to waiting in the car while he ran into a convenience store, his little hand waving as he promised to be right back. But then I heard the doors open. 2 voices, not one. The scrape of shoes against pavement, my son's laughter. And another steadier voice, low and professional. A man's. They slid into the front seats, oblivious to me pressed small in the back. I expected to hear jokes, maybe plans for dinner. Instead, I heard my name, spoken like a line item on a ledger. "We'll need her signature here," the man said, papers rustling. "She won't notice," my son replied. "She trusts me with everything. By next month, the deed will be in my name." The words fell like stones in my stomach. My name, my house, my trust treated like a signature to be stolen. I sat frozen, every nerve alert, my breath shallow. The overhead light had clicked off when they closed the doors, leaving me in a cocoon of darkness. My son's voice carried forward, steady, almost proud. "She won't even know. She never checks the mail. If we move quickly, by the time she notices, it'll all be official." The man hummed approval, a pen scratching paper. I stared at the back of my son's head, his shoulders, once small enough to lift with one arm, now broad and certain, moving as he gestured. I remembered smoothing his cowlick before school, packing sandwiches, cheering at his soccer games. Every memory collapsed under the weight of this new truth. He was planning to erase me from my own home. My throat tightened, but no sound came out. I gripped my knees' nails, digging into skin, the sharpness grounding me. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning their conversation, but not enough to block out certain words: transfer, property, consent. The lawyer's voice softened. "She's your mother. Are you sure you want to go this route?" A pause. My son exhaled. "She won't understand. It's easier this way. She's old-fashioned, always worried. I'll handle things better. Old-fashioned, always worried." That was how he saw me. Not as the woman who kept a roof over him when his father left. Not as the mother who pawned her wedding ring to cover his tuition. Just a worry, an inconvenience to be signed away. The car's interior felt smaller with every word. My back pressed against the seat, as though the leather might swallow me whole. I could not reveal myself, not yet. The betrayal was too raw, too sudden. I needed air. I needed silence, but I remained still, listening as my own child reduced me to paperwork. When they finally opened the doors again, a gust of cooler air swept in. Their voices faded toward the porch papers tucked under arms. I stayed curled in the back seat, trembling, the smell of leather now suffocating. It was supposed to be a game, a laugh. Instead, I had stumbled into the blueprint of my own erasure. The porch light flicked on outside, throwing a pale glow across the driveway. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at that light, wondering how long it had been since he looked at me with love, not calculation. The porch light was still on. When I finally slipped out of that car, I moved like a ghost. The air outside was thick with late summer humidity, heavy on my chest. I went straight inside, past the photographs that lined the hallway, each frame a reminder of the years that had built this home. My son's childhood smile stared back at me from every corner, a museum of sacrifices I once carried with pride. In those early years, I worked nights at the diner, mornings at the school cafeteria, and afternoons cleaning offices. I remember collapsing onto the couch, my feet aching so badly that I would soak them in a plastic tub of hot water, steam rising as I stared at the ceiling, too tired to even speak. But when he walked through the door, flushed from school or play, my exhaustion shifted into purpose. I lived for the sight of him eating a hot meal, for the feel of his small body curling against me on the couch, whispering stories before bed. There was never enough money. His father walked out when he was 8, leaving behind a pile of bills and the scent of cologne that lingered long after the closet was empty. I remember selling my grandmother's brooch to cover the mortgage, pawning my wedding band to make sure tuition payments cleared. I never told my son about the tears I shed in those pawn shop parking lots. He didn't need to know that his future was etched into every sacrifice I made. I gave up more than money. When I was diagnosed with breast cancer at 47, the doctor warned me that stress would slow my recovery. But who else was there? I dragged myself through chemo sessions wrapped in scarves to hide my thinning hair, then clocked into work as though my body wasn't crumbling from the inside. I learned to stir pots of soup with trembling hands, to smile when he brought friends over, even when the room spun. I thought my devotion was invisible, but surely I believed love would count it. Looking back, I see the small cracks I ignored. The times he called me dramatic when I tried to explain the bills, the way he rolled his eyes when I reminded him to save money, not spend it on gadgets. He was young, I told myself. He'd understand one day. One day, he'd see that every casserole, every overtime shift, every quiet cry behind the bathroom door was for him. But that day never came. Instead, he grew into a man who believed he could handle things better without me, as though the years of holding this house together with my own hands meant nothing. I can still smell the coffee I brewed at dawn, dark and bitter, to keep myself awake after back-to-back shifts. I can still hear the scrape of my shoes on the linoleum floors of the diner. The clang of plates, the hollow sound of coins counted and recounted until they made enough sense to stretch across bills. These were the sounds of love, though no one clapped for them, no one framed them on the wall. Now, when I walk through my kitchen, I notice the tiles I scrubbed until my knuckles bled, the cabinets I painted 3 times to hide the water stains. Every corner of this house is a ledger of sacrifices, proof of how much I poured into building stability for him. And yet, in that car, he spoke as though I were just another obstacle, someone to outmaneuver on his way to ownership. I thought about all the nights I sat up with him when he was sick, a damp washcloth on his forehead, whispering lullabies to calm his fever. I thought about the first suit I bought him for his college interviews, purchased on clearance, hemmed by my own clumsy hands. I thought about the promises I whispered to myself while lying awake, that one day all this would mean something, that he would remember, that he would stand beside me when my hands grew too weak. Instead, I am standing alone, realizing that perhaps every sacrifice had only taught him that my love was endless, that I would never say no. He mistook endurance for permission. He mistook devotion for surrender. It is a cruel thing to discover that the very love which once lifted your child has been repurposed into a tool for your undoing. And it is crueler still to feel resentment bloom where hope once lived. The photograph of him in cap and gown still hangs crooked in the hallway. I haven't straightened it. The frame gathers dust. The days after I overheard that conversation slipped by in a strange haze, like I was watching my own life through frosted glass. I went through the motions, watering the plants, folding laundry, sitting with a lukewarm cup of tea, but nothing felt solid anymore. My son's voice lingered in every corner of the house, not as comfort, but as a sharp reminder of what he had planned. At first, I told myself I might have misunderstood, that maybe I had dreamed it in that stuffy car lulled by the hum of cicadas. But then, the little things began to surface details I had brushed aside before. The mail. I used to fetch it each morning, a ritual with coffee. But lately, envelopes had gone missing. Bank statements, insurance forms, he always had some excuse. "Oh, I grabbed it for you, Mom. Don't worry about it." His tone had been casual, but now I replayed it with suspicion. The phone calls. I would walk into a room and he would lower his voice, or end the conversation quickly. "Work stuff," he'd say, sliding his phone into his pocket. I had believed him. Now I realized he hadn't been protecting me from worry, he had been protecting his plan. And the money. Once I tried to use my debit card at the grocery store. It was declined. Embarrassed, I paid in cash and brushed it off as a bank error. He called later and smoothed it over with the bank, but I never got a clear answer. At the time, I was grateful for his help. Now the memory burned. I began to notice the silences more than the words. At dinner, he used to ask me about my day, even if he only half listened. Lately, he sat scrolling through his phone while his plate grew cold, nodding absently when I spoke. When I pressed him, he grew defensive. "You worry too much. Just relax. Relax." The word felt like a dismissal, a wall between us. One night, I made a roast chicken the way he liked it, as a boy with rosemary from the little garden out back. I basted it carefully, wanting to taste something like love again. But when I set the plate on the table, he barely looked up. He picked at the food, muttered about having a late meeting, and left most of it untouched. I sat there, staring at the cooling chicken, the rosemary fragrance turning bitter in the empty air. The clink of his fork against the plate was the last sound before silence swallowed the room. That silence stayed with me. It wrapped around my nights, pressing into me heavier than the quilts I pulled up to my chin. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, turning slowly, wondering when my son had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a burden, a problem to be solved on paper. The emptiness settled in small ways. My coffee grew cold in the mornings because I forgot to drink it. My favorite books lay unopened on the end table. Even the cat seemed to sense it, curling up against me more tightly, as though trying to shield me from the quiet erosion of trust. It's a strange kind of grief mourning someone who is still alive and sitting at your own table. I found myself moving through the house like a caretaker of memories, not an owner. I dusted the shelves, but it was as if I were preparing the place for someone else. Every room held echoes of my labor, my sacrifices, yet the air whispered that none of it belonged to me anymore. And still I said nothing. I told myself I needed proof, that I couldn't confront him with just the echo of a conversation overheard in the dark. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid. Afraid of shattering whatever fragile bond still tethered us together. Afraid of the answer he might give if I asked outright. So I swallowed the silence. I let the plates cool. I let the mail pile up. I moved through the days as though I were already a guest in my own home. One evening, I stood at the window watching the porch light flicker against the dusk. My son's car pulled into the driveway. He sat in it for a while, talking on the phone, his face lit by the blue glow of the screen. He didn't glance toward the window, didn't look for me. For the first time, I wondered if he even saw me anymore. The porch light flickered once, then went out. The silence could have swallowed me whole if not for the small, stubborn flicker of doubt that refused to die. I needed to know if what I had overheard in that car was real, or if I had spun grief into paranoia. For weeks, I walked around half alive, carrying the weight of uncertainty like a stone in my chest. Then, one morning, as the sun slipped through the blinds, I decided I couldn't live with shadows anymore. I needed paper. I needed proof. I pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer, its pages already crinkled from years of shopping lists and phone messages. My hand trembled as I wrote the words, County Recorder's Office, Property Deeds. The ink bled slightly where my grip shook, but the act of writing steadied me. It felt like the beginning of reclaiming something I had almost lost my voice. The next day, I drove to the courthouse. My car rattled like an old kettle, each mile fueled more by determination than gasoline. Inside, the building smelled faintly of floor polish and paper. I walked down long corridors, my footsteps echoing, as though even the walls needed to bear witness. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up when I asked for copies of property records under my name. She slid a form toward me. My pen scratched across the paper, my name looping in tired strokes. When she disappeared into the back room, my stomach churned. I wanted to run to undo the request to return to the fragile ignorance I had been clinging to. But then I thought of the cooling dinners, the missing mail, the word old-fashioned falling from my son's lips like a verdict. I stayed. When the clerk returned, she placed a thin stack of documents on the counter. I carried them to a bench in the hallway, the pages trembling in my hands. And there it was, my name written in careful strokes I did not recognize. My signature, except it wasn't mine. I stared at the loop of letters so precise, so false. My son's name followed below, listed as grantee, the recipient of my home. My home. The place where I had painted walls at midnight, where I had nursed fevers, where I had stood barefoot in the kitchen with bills spread out like battle plans. Reduced to lines of ink I hadn't signed. The realization was cold, not fiery. It wasn't rage that struck me first, but a hollow clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not paranoia. This was theft, clothed in legal paper backed by the hand of my own child. I sat there a long time, the courthouse buzz fading around me. Lawyers in suits strode by, heels, clicked phones buzzed. But I was a statue, clutching pages that felt heavier than stone. I thought about all the years I had spent guarding this house, every late payment scraped together, every corner patched and painted. And here, with the sweep of someone else's pen, I had been erased. But the thing about clarity is that once it comes, you cannot unknow it. It burns away excuses. It leaves only truth. I folded the documents back into the envelope, slid them into my bag, and walked out into the sunlight. The air smelled sharper, almost metallic. The courthouse steps felt steeper on the way down, but I descended with a steadiness I hadn't felt in weeks. When I reached my car, I sat in the driver's seat and laid the papers across the steering wheel. My reflection in the windshield was pale, older than I remembered. But there was something else there, too. A steadiness in my eyes. I had proof, and proof could not be silenced. I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat, glancing at it as though it were a companion. Every street light, every stop sign, I touched the papers again to make sure they were real. They were my armor, now thin as they seemed. That night, I didn't cook. I didn't ask questions. I didn't try to reach him with small talk. I sat in the living room while he moved about the house, his footsteps careless, his laughter on the phone drifting through the walls. And I held my silence not from fear anymore, but from choice. I was waiting. The next morning, I opened the legal pad again. The ink smudges from my first note were still there. Below them, I wrote one more word, neat and deliberate lawyer. The paper smelled faintly of toner and betrayal. The envelope of forged deeds sat on my nightstand for 3 days before I could summon the courage to act. Each morning, I woke with the same hollow feeling, the pages whispering from the shadows, "Do something." On the 4th morning, I picked them up, smoothed the creases with my palm, and placed them carefully into my purse. The decision was made. I drove across town to a community center where I had heard that retired lawyers sometimes offered free consultations. The building was plain brick, stained from decades of rain, but inside the lobby was bright with volunteer flyers and the faint smell of coffee. I felt small walking in, clutching the envelope like a child clutches a doll, terrified it might slip from her fingers. The woman at the front desk looked at me kindly when I explained. She gave me a clipboard, and soon after, I was sitting across from a gray-haired man in a cardigan, his glasses perched low on his nose. His voice was calm, measured. "You did the right thing by coming," he said after skimming the papers. "This isn't just family business. It's fraud." The word seemed too sharp, too foreign to be attached to my son. Fraud was for strangers, for con men on television, not for the boy who once pressed dandelions into my hand and called them gifts. Yet there it was, stamped across my reality. Fraud. The lawyer explained the steps: file a civil suit request, injunctions, contact Adult Protective Services if needed. He spoke of legal remedies of dignity in the eyes of the court. His tone was professional, but his eyes held something gentler. The recognition that betrayal like this was not only legal, but personal. I signed retainer forms with a hand that shook only slightly. As the pen scratched across the page, I realized this was the first time in years that my signature felt like it belonged solely to me. When I returned home that evening, the porch light was already on. My son's car sat in the driveway, its engine still ticking with heat. I walked slowly to the front steps, the papers heavy in my bag. My heart raced, but my resolve had settled like stone. He opened the door before I reached it, surprised to see me standing there with my shoulders squared. "Mom," he said, his voice casual, almost amused. "Where have you been?" I met his eyes. "I know what you did," I said. His smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" I pulled the envelope from my bag and held it up. This, the forged signature, the deed, my name written by someone else's hand. For a moment, silence stretched between us, thick as the humid air. Then his expression hardened. "You don't understand. I was trying to make things easier. You worry too much about money, about bills. I was taking care of it." Taking care of it? My voice was steady, though inside my chest, my heart thrashed. By stealing my home. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "I'm your son. It's mine anyway. Why fight it?" I thought I would scream, but no scream came. What rose in me instead was something colder, quieter, more dangerous: dignity. I straightened my back and let the silence stretch until he looked away. Then I placed the envelope in his hands. "You can read the summons yourself," I said. "We'll let the court decide." His face flushed with anger, his lips pressed tight, but I did not flinch. I turned, walked into the house, and left him standing on the porch with the weight of his own choices. That night, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, steam rising into the dim light. The taste was bitter, but steady. For the first time in months, I felt my voice had not been swallowed by silence. It had been carried on paper, delivered through action. I glanced out the window. The porch light was still burning its glow, reaching into the night like a sentinel. The porch light was still burning. The next week moved in measured beats, each one defined by paperwork. Court filings, notarized statements, phone calls I had never imagined myself making. My life, once ordered by recipes and grocery lists, became a stack of forms, deadlines, and stamped envelopes. The lawyer from the community center had connected me to a pro bono legal aid office downtown. I sat in their cramped waiting room, surrounded by other faces, marked by betrayal. Women, men, elders, each clutching folders of documents, as if they were lifelines. When my name was called, I stepped into a narrow office lined with law books that looked older than I was. The attorney assigned to me was young, her suit slightly rumpled, but her eyes were sharp alert. She leafed through my envelope, pausing at the forged signature. "This," she said, tapping the page, "is enough to open a case. We'll file for an injunction to stop any transfer of title until the court can review." Hearing the words felt like oxygen filling lungs that had been starved. For weeks, I had been suffocating in silence, and now I had language that gave shape to my pain: injunction, fraud, protective relief. Cold terms, yes, but they were shields, and I needed shields. Still, there was a tremor inside me. This wasn't just paperwork, it was the beginning of standing against my own son. Late at night, I would sit at the kitchen table rereading the draft filings by the yellow glow of the lamp. Words like plaintiff and defendant turned family into adversaries, blood into legal categories. My hand rested against the cool ceramic of my teacup, wondering when love had been reduced to paragraphs in a complaint. The summons was served a week later. I wasn't home when it happened, but when I returned from errands, I found my son standing in the driveway, paper crumpled in his fist, eyes dark with fury. "How could you?" he spat as I stepped out of my car. I set my grocery bag on the hood, the plastic rustling in the wind. "How could you forged my name?" His face twisted. "I was protecting you. You're paranoid, Mom. You're old. You don't get how things work anymore. I was trying to handle it for you." The words sliced, but I let them fall. I had already heard worse in that car, spoken with laughter and pride. Now his rage was just confirmation. "I will not be erased," I said quietly. He shook his head, muttered something I couldn't catch, and stormed inside. I stayed in the driveway, the sky overhead dimming into gray. The bag of groceries was heavy against my palm, but heavier still was the truth: he no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me as an obstacle. That night, I sat in the living room, court papers spread across the coffee table. My hands traced the embossed stamp on the summons, feeling the weight of the state behind me. For years, I had been the one to shield him from debt collectors, from hunger, from the jagged edges of life. Now the law itself was my shield. The silence in the house was different after that. It wasn't the silence of avoidance, of cooling plates and unanswered questions. It was the silence of war before the first battle, charged and brittle. I moved carefully, each step, measured each breath, deliberate. One evening, as I folded laundry, I found one of his shirts balled up at the bottom of the basket. I smoothed it over with my palm, the fabric familiar, the scent of his cologne still clinging faintly. For a brief moment, I remembered the boy he had been, the boy who once reached for my hand as we crossed streets. Then I folded it, stacked it neatly, and placed it at his door. Dignity was not only in the courtroom, it was in refusing to let anger erase the mother still inside me. The hearing date arrived in the mail the next morning. I held the letter carefully, the ink stark against the paper. My name was there, not forged, not stolen. My name as plaintiff standing on its own. The paper smelled of toner and resolve. The letter with the hearing date stayed on the kitchen counter for days, its edges curling slightly from the humidity. I would pass by it while making tea or washing dishes, my eyes catching on the bold print of my name, my son's name beneath it. Plaintiff, defendant, mother, son. It was a cruel mirror, those titles pressed together on the page. At night, I would sit with the envelope in my lap, running my finger along the sealed flap, as though the paper itself could steady me. I knew what it meant. I would have to walk into a courtroom and face him not as the child I had raised, but as an adversary across the aisle. The thought made my stomach twist. The young attorney from legal aid called me twice a week, her voice brisk but kind. She explained what would happen, the motions, the evidence, the questions I might be asked. Just tell the truth, she said. You have the documents. The judge will see. The truth. Such a simple word, and yet it felt like walking a tightrope across decades of sacrifice. Because the truth wasn't only that my signature had been forged. The truth was also that I had raised a boy who now believed deception was easier than honesty. That was the wound the court couldn't heal. The days leading up to the hearing stretched long. I found myself pacing through the house, pausing in doorways, touching the worn banister with my palm. This was the place I had defended brick by brick from foreclosure and storms from loneliness and despair. Now it felt like evidence, each wall a witness I would call silently to my side. My son avoided me. He slipped in and out of the house like a shadow, doors slamming, footsteps quick. When we crossed paths, his eyes darted past mine. He didn't ask if I wanted coffee, didn't sit at the table. The silence between us had become a canyon wide and unbridgeable. One evening, I heard his voice through the walls, raised and sharp. He was on the phone muttering about lawyers bleeding us dry and her being stubborn. The words stung, but they also fueled something steadier inside me. If stubbornness meant refusing to vanish, then stubborn I would be. The night before the hearing, I laid out my clothes carefully. A navy blouse, pressed slacks, the pearl earrings I had inherited from my mother. Small, simple armor. I placed the folder of documents beside them, each page in order highlighted where my signature wavered under forgery. My handwriting had never been graceful, but it was mine. Theirs was smooth, calculated, a counterfeit of identity itself. I barely slept. The hours dragged, punctuated by the tick of the clock and the occasional passing car headlights washing across the walls. I thought about the boy I once walked to kindergarten, his hand warm in mine. I thought about the man he had become, his hand pressing a pen against paper to erase me. The ache in my chest was sharp, but beneath it, a current of resolve kept beating. Morning came with pale light and the sound of birds outside the window. I dressed slowly, fastening the earrings, smoothing the blouse, checking my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was older than I remembered, lines carved deep around her eyes. But there was clarity there, too. I was not invisible. Not yet. At the courthouse, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. The metal detector buzzed as I stepped through, my purse clutched close. I followed the signs to the courtroom. Each step measured my breath, steadying as I rehearsed the truth in my head. When I entered, my son was already there, seated beside his lawyer. He glanced up briefly, then looked away. My heart clenched, but I walked to my place, sat down, and placed the folder on the table in front of me. The clerk called the case number. The judge entered, robes swishing as everyone rose. I felt the weight of the room settle on my shoulders. This was no longer the quiet betrayal of overheard voices. This was public now, written into record, preserved in transcripts. My lawyer leaned toward me. "Breathe," she whispered. I did. The judge's gavel struck wood sharp and final. The gavel echoed in my chest long after the sound faded. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the air conditioning humming above like a low drone. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded tightly in my lap, the folder of documents resting on the wood before me. Across the aisle, my son leaned back in his chair, jaw set, arms crossed. He looked like a stranger wearing his face. The judge adjusted his glasses and nodded toward my lawyer. Proceed? My attorney rose her heels, clicking against the floor. Your Honor, we are here today to contest the attempted transfer of property belonging to my client, Ms. Margaret Hale. My name echoed in the room heavier than I had ever heard it. The defense filed a deed of transfer that includes her signature. We will demonstrate that signature was not hers and that she never consented to this transaction. I glanced at my son. He stared straight ahead, unflinching, though I saw his fingers twitch where they gripped the armrest. The bailiff stepped forward with the exhibit. Pages slid onto the judge's desk. My lawyer lifted a copy and turned toward me. Ms. Hale, do you recognize this document? I swallowed hard. My throat was dry, but my voice carried. Yes. Is that your signature? I leaned forward, staring at the ink. The loops were too neat, the strokes too deliberate. My hand had never moved that smoothly, not after years of arthritis creeping into my fingers. No, I said quietly. That isn't mine. The room was silent. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade. The judge tapped the page with his pen. Noted. My lawyer slid another paper forward, one of my old checks. For comparison, Your Honor, this is my client's actual handwriting. The difference was stark. My jagged, uneven letters against the smooth imitation. I felt exposed, as if my entire life had been reduced to the awkward loops of my name. But beneath that vulnerability, something steady pulsed the truth. Exhibit A, Deed of Transfer. Filed May 17, 2023. Grantor, Margaret Hale grantee. Thomas Hale property, 1426 Willow Creek Drive. Signature, purported grantor. Margaret Hale. Verification upon inspection. Handwriting analysis indicates signature inconsistent with known samples. Irregular pen pressure. Uncharacteristic loop formation in capital M and H. The document returned to the evidence pile, but its weight lingered in the air. The defense lawyer rose his tie, perfectly knotted, his voice smooth. Mrs. Hale, could it be that you simply forgot signing this? It happens. Memory fades. His words stung more than I expected. Memory fades, as if age itself were a weapon against me. I straightened in my chair. No, I said firmly. I may forget where I put my keys, but I do not forget signing away my home. A murmur rippled through the small gallery. The judge raised his hand for silence. The defense pressed on, but each question only clarified the truth. I hadn't signed it. I hadn't consented. My home was mine, and no one, not even my son, had the right to erase me from it. When the questioning ended, I sat back, my chest rising and falling slowly. My lawyer placed a hand on mine under the table, a brief, steadying gesture. Across the aisle, my son's eyes flicked toward me for the first time that day. There was no remorse in them, only anger, sharp and glinting like broken glass. I looked back at him, not with fury, but with something stronger, the knowledge that his power over me had cracked. The judge gathered the papers, tapping them into order. This court will review the evidence and reconvene at the next hearing, he said. The gavel struck once echoing finality. As I rose to leave, the sound lingered in my chest. It was no longer just a gavel. It was the sound of my voice, steady at last, finding its way into record. The gavel's echo followed me out of the room. The days after the first hearing blurred together. I should have felt victorious having spoken the truth in front of a judge, but instead, I felt emptied. My body moved through rooms while my mind dragged behind, heavy and slow. Even the house felt foreign, as if it belonged to the papers and not to me. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the judge's words replaying memory fades. They had been meant to discredit me, but they lodged deep like a splinter. I began to doubt myself in small, corrosive ways. Did I remember correctly? Had I signed something buried in stacks of bills? Was I too old to fight this? One afternoon, I wandered into the community health clinic. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and hand sanitizer. Children fidgeting with coloring books while their parents scrolled on phones. When the therapist called my name, I hesitated, almost turned back. But something inside urged me forward. Her office was warm, filled with plants and shelves of well-worn books. She invited me to sit. Her voice was calm, unhurried. "Tell me what brings you here." And I did. The car, the forged papers, the courtroom, my son. My voice trembled, but I kept talking, words spilling like water finally breaking through a dam. She nodded, taking notes. At the end, she said softly, "You're not imagining this. What you've described is real and it's painful. But you're still here. You're not broken." Therapist session. Progress note. Client, Margaret Hale, 62 years old. Date, June 14, 2023. Affect subdued, tearful at times, but oriented X3 person place time. Themes: betrayal by adult son, fear of losing autonomy, anxiety around memory reliability. Insight: demonstrates clear understanding of legal process and events. Clinical impression: trauma response, hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts, sleep disruption. Recommendation: weekly sessions, grounding exercises, affirming boundaries. Quote from client: "He forged my name, but sometimes I wonder if I forged myself into someone too easy to erase." I read the notes later when she handed me a copy. My own words on paper startled me. I had never said them out loud before, never admitted how invisible I felt. Yet seeing them written by someone else gave them weight, gave me distance. The following week, I began practicing her advice. When panic rose, I pressed my feet into the floor, naming the objects I could see: lamp, curtain, teacup, window. It anchored me. When doubt whispered that maybe I was imagining things, I touched the folder of documents on my nightstand. The evidence silenced the lies. Meanwhile, the legal process marched forward. More filings, more letters from the court. My son slammed doors, muttered curses, avoided my gaze. The house grew smaller, more suffocating. But within that shrinking space, I began to build something no one could steal: my own steadiness. I kept going to therapy. I told her about the sleepless nights, the quiet meals, the ache of knowing my son despised me. She reminded me that grief and betrayal could coexist with dignity. That survival was not weakness. That silence chosen could be strength. I clung to those words. One evening, I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes, the water running warm over my hands. Outside, the porch light flickered, then steadied. I watched its glow spill onto the driveway, remembering the first time I realized my son saw me, not as his mother, but as a burden. The ache was still there, but it no longer hollowed me. It pressed against me like a bruised, tender yes, but proof of healing. The porch light steadied in the dark. By the time the second hearing arrived, the courthouse no longer felt like an alien place. The smell of floor polish, the buzz of fluorescent lights, the shuffle of lawyers' briefcases, these had become familiar, almost like furniture, in a house I had learned to inhabit. Still, when my son walked in, flanked by his attorney, my heart clenched. He wouldn't look at me, and I no longer expected him to. The judge entered robe sweeping, and we all rose. This time, the proceedings were longer, heavier. Witnesses called, exhibits passed. Words like intent and capacity tossed across the room like stones. My name was repeated over and over, no longer a word of intimacy, but a term in a legal argument. When my turn came, I stood and swore the oath, my hand trembling slightly on the Bible. The clerk's eyes were kind, but the air felt thick as I took my seat at the witness stand. My lawyer asked questions first, guiding me through the timeline. I spoke slowly, clearly, describing the night in the car, the words I had overheard, the papers I had retrieved from the county office. My voice wavered only once when I said the phrase "my own son," but I steadied myself, pressing my shoes into the floor. Then came the cross-examination. The defense attorney leaned against the podium, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "Mrs. Hale, you're 62 years old, correct?" "Yes. And you've had some health issues in the past, haven't you?" "Yes. But He cut in. "Chemotherapy, wasn't it? Would you agree those treatments can sometimes affect memory and concentration?" The courtroom blurred for a moment. My breath caught in my throat. He was building the same wall my son had hinted at, the frailty of age, the fragility of memory. I forced myself to breathe. "I remember plenty," I said firmly. "I remember working 3 jobs to keep that house. I remember the smell of rosemary when I cooked for him. I remember every detail of that night in the car. What I don't remember is signing away my home because I never did." A murmur rose from the gallery, quickly hushed by the bailiff. The attorney frowned, but pressed on. "So you deny the possibility that you simply forgot?" I met his eyes. "I deny it. Completely." The judge scribbled notes, expression unreadable. My lawyer placed another document in front of me, a handwriting analysis prepared by an expert. I read it aloud, my voice steady, each word another stone laid in the foundation of truth. The comparison was clear. The forgery was undeniable. When my testimony ended, I returned to my seat, legs weak, but spirit unbroken. My son shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. For the first time, I saw something flicker across his features. Not remorse, not yet, but unease. The hearing adjourned with no decision. The judge said he would review and rule in writing. The gavel struck sharp as thunder, and the room emptied in a rustle of papers and footsteps. Outside the courthouse, I paused at the top of the steps. The summer air was heavy, the sun bright against the stone columns. People brushed past me, their voices fading into the hum of traffic. I stood still, clutching the railing, letting the warmth soak into my skin. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of forgetting. The truth was etched into record now, beyond memory, beyond doubt. The sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps. After the second hearing, the house fell into a silence so deep I could hear the tick of the kitchen clock echo through the walls. My son came and went with barely a word. Sometimes I heard his footsteps in the hall at night, quick and uneven, but he never stopped at my door. I wanted to speak, to ask him why, but every time I opened my mouth, the words curdled into ash. Instead, I wrote. I sat at the kitchen table with a pad of paper, the same one I had once used for grocery lists, and I let the ink flow. The words came haltingly at first, then in a rush, as though they had been waiting for years. Dear Thomas, I don't know when I lost you. Was it the day your father left, and I tried too hard to fill both roles? Was it the years I worked nights and came home smelling of grease, too tired to laugh? Or was it later when I stopped being the hero and became only the one who worried? You are my whole world. Every choice I made, every sacrifice, every scar I carried them like medals because they meant you had a chance at something better. I thought one day you'd see. I thought one day you'd understand. But sitting in that courtroom, I realized you don't see me at all. You see a signature, a problem, a burden. You don't see the mother who pressed your fevered forehead with a washcloth. You don't see the woman who gave up her wedding band so you could wear a cap and gown. And maybe you never will. But I want you to know this. I am not invisible. I am not erased. This house, this name, this life, they are mine. And no matter how you try to write me out, I will stand. I love you even now, but I will not surrender. Mom. I folded the pages carefully and slipped them into an envelope, but I never addressed it. It sat in the drawer beside my bed, hidden among socks and scarves. Some truths are too heavy to send. The days stretched on. Court filings trickled through the mail, each stamped with dates and signatures, each reminder that the final decision had not yet been made. I watered the garden, brewed my tea, sat quietly with the cat purring against my leg. Life reduced itself to small rituals, each one an anchor. At night, when the silence pressed too heavily, I would open the drawer, unfold the letter, and read it under the glow of the bedside lamp. The words both comforted and ached. They were the conversation we would never have, the bridge that had already burned. One evening, I caught my reflection in the window as I read, my face lined and tired but steady. I thought about how many times I had been told to relax, to not worry. Yet here I was, holding the proof that worry was survival, that vigilance had saved me. The letter stayed in the drawer. The drawer stayed closed. The judgment came on a Tuesday morning in a plain white envelope slid through the mail slot with the rest of the day's bills. I held it for a long time before opening it, the paper cool and smooth beneath my fingertips. My hands trembled slightly as I tore it open, unfolded the pages, and began to read. The ruling was clear. The deed transfer was void, the forgery undeniable. The property remained in my name, mine to keep, mine to live in. The court had sided with me. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same place where I had once scribbled grocery lists, paid overdue bills, and written letters I never sent. Tears blurred the words, but they were not the tears I had feared, tears of loss, of defeat. These were tears of survival. When my son came home later that evening, he didn't ask. He must have known. He walked past me without a word, his shoulders stiff, his eyes averted. A door slammed down the hall, and I understood in that instant that the ruling had not only severed the deed, but also whatever fragile thread still tethered us. The grief of that knowledge was heavy, but it was honest. Better an honest emptiness than a house built on lies. In the days that followed, the house grew quieter. No footsteps in the hall. No voices drifting through the walls. He left without telling me when or if he would return. I moved through the rooms, slowly touching the banister, the door frames, the window sills, claiming them not as possessions, but as companions. They had borne witness to my fight, and now they stood with me. I found myself spending more time in the garden. The soil was damp and rich from spring rains clinging to my hands as I planted rows of tomatoes and marigolds. Each seed pressed into the earth felt like a promise to myself. I am still here. I am still rooted. The sun warmed my back, the breeze carried the scent of cut grass, and for the first time in months, I felt something like peace settling over me. Sometimes I thought of the letter tucked away in my drawer, words he would never read. Sometimes I thought of the boy he had been, dandelions in his hand, laughter in his voice. Those memories hurt, but I no longer clung to them as proof of who he should be. They were simply echoes fading, but not forgotten. One afternoon, as I knelt among the rows, dirt under my fingernails, I noticed the first fragile sprout breaking through the soil. Small, green, determined. I cupped it gently, my fingers brushing the tender leaves. It was a simple thing, a plant pushing toward the light, but it felt like a reflection of myself. The garden became my refuge. I worked until the sky deepened to gold, until the porch light flickered on. At night, I sat with a cup of tea watching the glow spill across the yard, steady and constant. I had not won back my son. Perhaps I never would. But I had won back myself. And that, finally, was enough. The garden kept blooming. The house feels different now. Not because its walls have changed, or the paint, or the creak of the floorboards, but because I know it is mine in a way that no one can touch again. The papers in the county office say so, stamped and sealed, but more than that, my heart says so. For the first time in years, I walk from room to room without the shadow of doubt trailing me. I find myself slowing down. I no longer rush to fill the silence with chatter or questions. The silence belongs to me now. It is not neglect, not dismissal, it is rest. In the morning, I brew my coffee and let it cool to just the right warmth. I take it to the back porch where the garden stretches beneath the sun, green and stubborn and alive. The marigolds flare bright, the tomatoes climbing sturdily on their stakes. The earth has kept its promises. Sometimes I think of my son. I wonder if he has found another place to live, another story to tell himself about why he did what he did. The ache of that wondering has dulled, but it hasn't vanished. A mother's love does not vanish. It lingers, reshaped into something quieter, harder, almost mineral in its endurance. I carry it the way one carries an old scar, not tender anymore, but still there, etched into skin. There are days when loneliness presses at the edges of the house, especially in the evenings when the porch light flicks on and there is no second voice to share it with. But I have learned that loneliness is not the same as loss. Loneliness is a space, and in that space, I have begun to plant something of my own peace. The garden teaches me daily. It teaches me that roots survive storms, that blooms return even after frost, that soil holds memory, but also makes way for new growth. I press my hands into it, dirt catching beneath my nails, and I feel grounded, not erased, not invisible, still here. When I lie down at night, I think less of the courtroom and more of the stillness I earned afterward. I think of my name written in my own uneven hand, jagged but true. That name is mine, and so is this life. Some treasures had been recovered. Others, more valuable, still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.